My name is Quentin Adams, and at 68 years old, I never expected to be homeless again. I spent 40 years in construction, building homes for others while raising my son Thomas alone after my wife died. When health problems forced me to retire, Thomas insisted I move in with his family. I thought I had finally found peace in my golden years. Then came that Tuesday evening when Thomas looked me straight in the eyes and said those words that still echo in my mind. "We don't have space for you. Get out." If you've ever felt betrayed by family, you know that pain cuts deeper than any knife. Let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button while I tell you what happened when my own son kicked me to the curb. I dedicated my entire life to building things that last. For 40 years, I worked construction sites across 3 states, from luxury apartments in Manhattan to suburban developments in New Jersey. My hands shaped the homes where countless families built their lives, all while I struggled to build something lasting for my own family. My wife Julia and I had Thomas when we were both 30. She was a kindergarten teacher with a smile that could brighten even the darkest days on a construction site. We saved every penny we could in our modest 2-bedroom home in Trenton. We weren't rich by any means, but we were happy. We had plans, dreams for our future together. Then Julia was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer when Thomas was only 13. She fought hard for almost 2 years, but in the end, cancer took her from us. I became a single father overnight, trying to navigate raising a teenage boy while drowning in medical bills and grief. "We'll make it through, Dad," Thomas would say during those difficult years. Mom would want us to stay strong, and we did make it through somehow. I picked up extra shifts, worked weekends, and even learned specialty carpentry to increase my hourly rate. Every decision I made revolved around one goal: giving Thomas the opportunities Julia and I had dreamed for him. When he got accepted to Rutgers with a partial scholarship, I sold our family car and took the bus to work for 2 years to help cover his tuition. "You don't have to do this, Dad," Thomas had protested. "Your education is an investment in both our futures," I told him. "Your mother would have wanted this." After graduation, Thomas landed a job at a software company. Within 5 years, he was earning more than I ever had in my life. He married Amanda, a marketing executive he met at work, and they soon had 2 beautiful children, Jackson and Lily. I was so proud watching my son build the kind of life Julia and I had always wanted for him. I continued working construction well past when most of my colleagues had retired. The physical labor became harder as I entered my 60s, but construction work was all I knew. Then, 3 months ago, I collapsed on a job site. The doctors called it a mild heart attack and warned that continued physical labor could trigger a more serious one. "Dad, this is ridiculous," Thomas said when he visited me in the hospital. "You need to retire. You can sell your house and come live with us. We have plenty of space." At first I resisted. I valued my independence and didn't want to burden my son. But Thomas was insistent. "Think about it," he said. "You'll get to see Jackson and Lily every day. They barely know their grandfather." That argument was the one that finally convinced me. My grandchildren were 10 and 8, growing up so fast. I had missed too much of their lives already, only seeing them on holidays and occasional weekend visits. Thomas and Amanda lived in a beautiful 5-bedroom house in an upscale suburb. Thomas had done well for himself as a software engineering manager. The house had a large backyard with a pool, a finished basement, and even a small guest house that Thomas used as a home office. "We can convert the office into your room," Thomas explained. "It's private, has its own bathroom, and connects to the main house through the kitchen. You'll have your independence but still be part of the family." The plan made sense. I put my modest 2-bedroom house on the market, and it sold quickly in the hot real estate market. After paying off my remaining mortgage, I had just over $200,000, not enough to retire comfortably on my own, but a decent contribution to Thomas's household. "Keep your money, Dad," Thomas had insisted when I offered to contribute. "No, son, I need to pay my way," I told him firmly. "I won't be a burden." We finally agreed that I would contribute $100,000 toward household expenses and keep the rest for my personal needs and eventual end-of-life care. The arrangement seemed perfect. I would have family around me. In my final years, my grandchildren would get to know their grandfather, and I could finally rest after decades of hard, physical labor. The day I moved in, Thomas and his family welcomed me with a big dinner. Amanda had prepared pot roast, my favorite, and the kids had made a Welcome Grandpa banner that hung in the dining room. That first night, surrounded by family in a beautiful home, I felt truly blessed. After years of sacrifice and loneliness, I finally had what I always wanted, to be part of a loving family again. To new beginnings, Thomas had toasted at dinner, raising his glass, and to having 3 generations under one roof. We all clinked glasses, and I felt tears welling in my eyes. Julia would have loved to see this moment. Our boy had grown into a successful man, with a beautiful family of his own, and now he was taking care of his old man. It seemed like everything had come full circle. If only I had known then how quickly circles can break. The first week living with Thomas and his family seemed like a dream. Each morning, I woke up early, out of habit from decades of construction work. I would quietly make coffee and sit on the back porch, watching the sunrise and listening to the birds. Sometimes Lily would join me before school, curious about the different bird calls. Those peaceful mornings were precious. "That's a cardinal," I would tell her, pointing to a flash of red. "And that's a chickadee over there." "How do you know so much about birds, Grandpa?" she asked one morning. "Your grandmother taught me," I explained. "She used to keep a bird journal. Maybe we could start one together." Lily's eyes lit up at the suggestion, and for a moment, I felt a connection to Julia through our granddaughter. I tried to make myself useful around the house. Construction work teaches you to fix just about anything. So I repaired the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, fixed the squeaky hinges on the back door, and even rebuilt the wobbly porch steps. I also started cooking breakfast each morning. Nothing fancy, just eggs, bacon, and toast. But it gave me a sense of contributing to the household. It was during the second week that I began noticing subtle changes in Thomas's behavior. One morning, he came into the kitchen while I was making breakfast and frowned. "Dad, do you have to get up so early?" "The coffee maker wakes everyone up." "Sorry, son," I replied, surprised. "Old habits die hard. I can wait until 7 to make coffee if that helps." He nodded but didn't smile. "And maybe don't use so many pans for breakfast. Amanda likes to keep the kitchen clean." The comment stung, but I brushed it off. Adjusting to living with others after years alone would naturally require some compromise. The next day, I was reading to Lily in the living room when Thomas came home from work. He paused in the doorway, watching us for a moment before speaking. "Lily, don't you have homework to do?" "We're just finishing this chapter, Daddy," she replied. "Now, Lily," Thomas insisted, his tone unusually firm. "Grandpa needs his rest anyway." As Lily gathered her books, I caught a glimpse of something in Thomas's expression, not quite anger, but something close to resentment. It was gone in an instant, replaced by his usual polite smile, but it left me unsettled. Meals became increasingly tense. At first, we all ate together at the large dining table, sharing stories about our days. But gradually, Thomas began working late or eating quickly before retreating to his home office. Amanda followed his lead, citing evening conference calls or emails that needed attention. Soon, I was eating alone with the children, who seemed confused by their parents' absence. "Why doesn't Daddy eat with us anymore?" Jackson asked one evening. "Your dad is very busy with work," I explained, though I wasn't convinced that was the whole truth. One afternoon, I overheard Thomas talking to the children in the backyard. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the window to my room was open, and their voices carried clearly. "Remember that Grandpa is only staying temporarily," Thomas was saying, "until he figures out his next step." "But I thought he was living with us now," Lily protested. "It's complicated, sweetie," Thomas replied. "Adults sometimes need to make changes. Just don't get too used to the current arrangement." My heart sank at these words. This contradicted everything Thomas had said when convincing me to move in. He had spoken of multi-generational living, of me being there to watch the grandchildren grow up. Now, barely 3 weeks later, he was preparing them for my departure. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I had done since Julia died. It helped me process my thoughts when I had no one to talk to. "Something isn't right with Thomas," I wrote. "He's not the boy I raised. There's a coldness in him I don't recognize. Is it possible I never really knew my own son?" The next day, I called my old friend Frank, who had retired to Florida years earlier. Frank and I had worked construction together for 20 years, and he was the closest thing I had to a brother. "Give it time, Quentin," Frank advised when I shared my concerns. "Moving in with family is always an adjustment. Thomas probably just needs space to adapt to the new arrangement." I wanted to believe Frank was right, but my instincts told me something deeper was wrong. I tried to talk to Thomas that weekend, catching him alone in the garage as he put away golf clubs after a morning on the course. "Son, is everything okay? I feel like something's bothering you." Thomas barely looked at me as he arranged his golf clubs meticulously in their stand. "Everything's fine, Dad. Just busy with work stuff. If this living arrangement isn't working out—" I said everything's fine, he interrupted, his voice sharp. "Can we drop it? I have a conference call in 10 minutes. He brushed past me, leaving me standing alone in the garage, more confused and hurt than before. That night, Amanda suggested I might be more comfortable eating dinner in my room to avoid the chaos of family dinner time. I understood I was being excluded but didn't know why. As days passed, Jackson and Lily, who had initially been excited to have their grandfather around, seemed to spend less time with me. When I offered to help Jackson with his science project, he told me his father had said he should work on it alone. When I invited Lily to continue our birdwatching, she said her mother had scheduled her for extra swimming lessons. Slowly but surely, I was being isolated in a house full of people. The warmth I had felt upon arrival had cooled considerably, leaving me confused and increasingly lonely. Something had changed, but I couldn't identify what it was or why it had happened. All I knew was that the dream of being part of a loving family again was slipping away, replaced by a growing sense of unease and rejection. As the second month in Thomas's home began, the subtle slights evolved into unmistakable exclusion. The room I occupied, once described as private and comfortable, suddenly became inadequate for family needs. "Dad, we're thinking of converting this space back into a proper office," Thomas announced one morning. "Amanda needs a workspace at home now that her company is downsizing their physical office." "Of course," I replied, trying to hide my confusion. "Where would you like me to move?" Thomas led me to a small room off the laundry area that had previously been used for storage. It was half the size of my current room, with no windows and barely enough space for a twin bed and small dresser. "It's only temporary," he assured me, though his tone lacked conviction, "until we figure out a better arrangement." That evening, as I was moving my belongings to the smaller room, I noticed several of my personal items were damaged. The framed photo of Julia and me on our wedding day had a cracked glass. My collection of carpentry tools, high-quality instruments I'd owned for decades, had been carelessly tossed in a box, some with visible damage to the handles and blades. "What happened to my things?" I asked Amanda, showing her the broken picture frame. She barely glanced at it. "Oh, the kids were helping pack. You know how clumsy children can be." But Jackson and Lily had always been careful around my belongings, especially the photos of their grandmother they never met. Something didn't add up. Family activities increasingly excluded me. One Saturday morning, I came into the kitchen to find everyone dressed for an outing. "Where are you all headed?" I asked cheerfully. Thomas and Amanda exchanged glances before Thomas answered. "Just taking the kids to the amusement park. We figured you wouldn't be interested. All that walking and noise." "I love amusement parks," I said, feeling my heart sink. "I took you to Six Flags every summer, remember?" "That was different, Dad," Thomas replied dismissively. "Anyway, we're running late. There's leftover pasta in the fridge for lunch." They left without another word, and I spent the day alone in the empty house, wondering what I had done to deserve such treatment from my own son. It was during this period of increasing isolation that I accidentally discovered a possible explanation for Thomas's behavior. Late one night, unable to sleep in my windowless room, I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. Voices drifted from Thomas and Amanda's bedroom, raised voices, engaged in a heated argument. "We can't keep avoiding the issue, Thomas," Amanda was saying, her voice tense with frustration. "The credit card companies are threatening legal action now." "I'll figure it out," Thomas snapped back. "I always do. $50,000 doesn't just figure itself out. This is worse than last time. The house payment is already 2 months behind." I froze, glass in hand. Financial troubles? Thomas had always projected an image of success and stability. His job paid well, and they lived in an expensive neighborhood. I had no idea they were struggling. "At least we have Dad's money as a cushion," Thomas said, his voice lower now. "The $100,000 he contributed should keep the wolves at bay while I get things under control. That was supposed to go toward the kids' college funds, not your gambling debts," Amanda replied, disgust evident in her voice. Gambling debts. The words hit me like a physical blow. Thomas had a gambling problem? How had I missed this? I thought back to his frequent golf games that lasted well into the evening, the unexplained absences, the tense phone calls he took in private. "Your father thinks that money is going toward household expenses," Amanda continued. "He sold his house to help us, Thomas. He has nowhere else to go." "He'll never know," Thomas replied coldly. "By the time the money's gone, we'll have figured out a new living arrangement for him anyway." I carefully retreated to my room, my mind reeling from what I'd overheard. The son I thought I knew, responsible, successful, caring, was using my retirement money to cover gambling debts while planning to send me away. The betrayal cut deep, but it also explained the increasingly cold treatment I'd been receiving. The next morning, I attempted to talk to Thomas about what I'd heard, catching him alone before he left for work. "Son, I think we need to have an honest conversation about the household finances," I began carefully. Thomas's expression immediately hardened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I'm just concerned that my contribution is being properly managed. I worked hard for that money." "Are you accusing me of something?" Thomas's voice rose defensively. "After everything I've done, taking you in when you had nowhere else to go? That's not what I meant." "I don't have time for this," he interrupted. "Some of us have real jobs to get to." The conversation ended with Thomas storming out and me standing alone in the kitchen, hurt by the implication that my decades of physical labor somehow didn't constitute real work. That evening, Amanda approached me while Thomas was still at work. Her expression was strained as she sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Quentin, I need to be honest with you," she began, not meeting my eyes. "Having you here has been more challenging than we anticipated." "In what way?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "The space, for one thing, and the additional expenses." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "Thomas feels you're becoming too much of a burden." "A burden?" I repeated, the words stinging. "I contributed a substantial amount to this household, money that was meant to support me through retirement." Amanda had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Yes, well, circumstances change. We're thinking perhaps an assisted living facility would be better suited to your needs." "My needs?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. My only need was to be part of my family's life, to know my grandchildren. "It's just not working out," she said, standing up to end the conversation. "I'm sure you understand." From that point on, my existence in Thomas's home became increasingly marginalized. I was encouraged to take meals alone in my room for privacy. My grandchildren were told to give Grandpa space, code for avoiding me entirely. Most of my remaining personal items were moved to boxes in the garage without my permission, including family photo albums and keepsakes from my life with Julia. The message was clear. I was no longer welcome in my son's home, despite having given up everything to be there. What I didn't yet understand was why Thomas was so desperate to push me away, or what I would do when the final rejection came. 3 months after moving into Thomas's home, the situation reached its inevitable breaking point. That evening began normally enough. If you could call my new normal normal, I ate dinner alone in my small room, then ventured out to the kitchen to wash my dishes. Thomas rarely brought work colleagues home, so I was surprised to find a well-dressed man sitting at the dining table with Thomas and Amanda. "Dad," Thomas said, his tone immediately tense. "This is Warren Davis, my business partner." "Pleasure to meet you, sir," Warren said, extending his hand. "Thomas has mentioned you recently moved in." "Yes. About 3 months ago now," I replied, shaking his hand, though it feels like just yesterday. An awkward silence followed, as Thomas and Amanda exchanged glances. "Dad was just heading back to his room," Thomas said pointedly. "He tires easily these days." "Nonsense," Warren replied. "I'd love to hear about your construction career, Quentin. Thomas mentioned you built half the developments in Mercer County." Warmed by the rare interest, I joined them at the table. The conversation flowed surprisingly well. Warren asked thoughtful questions about my work, and for the first time in weeks, I felt valued for my experience and knowledge. Thomas remained unusually quiet, sipping his wine and checking his phone frequently. "So you're partners in the software business?" I asked Warren, trying to include Thomas in the conversation. "That's right," Warren confirmed. "Thomas and I launched our consulting firm last year after leaving the corporate world. It's been quite the adventure. An adventure that's finally paying off," Thomas added, somewhat defensively. "We just landed the Peterson account last week." "That's wonderful news," I said sincerely. "I always knew you'd be successful, son." "It hasn't been easy," Warren admitted, "especially with the financial pressures of starting a new business. I nearly had to remortgage my house last winter when we were waiting on client payments." "At least you didn't have to resort to other means," I said without thinking. Thomas always had a knack for finding creative solutions to money problems. The room fell silent. Thomas's face drained of color. "What exactly does that mean, Dad?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I realized my mistake immediately. "Just that you've always been resourceful," I backpedaled. "Remember how you started that lawn mowing business in high school? But the damage was done." Warren looked curiously between us, sensing the sudden tension. "Creative solutions?" he repeated. "Like what?" "Nothing," Thomas said sharply. "Dad's confused. He gets things mixed up these days." The remainder of dinner was painfully awkward. Warren left shortly after dessert, declining Thomas's offer to discuss their upcoming presentation. As soon as the front door closed behind him, Thomas rounded on me, his face contorted with rage. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, slamming his palm on the dining table. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" "I didn't mean anything by it," I said, genuinely confused by the intensity of his reaction. "Warren almost pulled out of our partnership last year when he heard rumors about my financial issues," Thomas hissed. "I've spent months rebuilding his trust, and you just casually toss out comments about other means?" "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know," Thomas shouted. "You don't know anything about my life or my business. You just barge in here with your old man stories and your outdated advice, interfering in things you don't understand." Amanda appeared in the doorway, her expression alarmed. "Thomas, the children can hear you." "I don't care." Thomas was beyond reason now, years of hidden resentment boiling over. "I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of him being here, judging me, watching me, always looking disappointed like I haven't lived up to his precious expectations." "That's not true," I protested, stunned by the accusation. "I've always been proud of you." "Proud?" Thomas laughed bitterly. "Is that why you remind me at every opportunity how hard you worked to put me through college? How you sacrificed everything for me? Do you know what that kind of pressure does to someone?" "I never meant to pressure you," I said quietly. "I just wanted you to have opportunities I didn't have." "Well, congratulations," Thomas spat. "I had those opportunities, and now I have crushing debt, a failing business, and a father who won't stop reminding me of everything he gave up for me." I stood there, absorbing the verbal blows, seeing decades of misunderstanding and unspoken resentment pour out of my son. Had I really been so blind to his feelings? Had my pride in his achievements been perceived as pressure all these years? I think it's time we stop pretending, Thomas continued, his voice lower but no less intense. This isn't working. It was never going to work. Thomas, Amanda interjected, maybe we should discuss this tomorrow when everyone's calmer. No, Thomas said firmly. I'm done waiting. I'm done pretending. He turned to me, his eyes cold. We don't have space for you. Get out. The words hung in the air between us, final and devastating. Even Amanda looked shocked at the brutality of his declaration. Thomas, she gasped, you can't just— I can, and I am, Thomas insisted. This is my house, and I decide who lives in it. I looked at my son, this stranger wearing my child's face, and felt an odd sense of calm settle over me. The worst had happened. After months of tension and uncertainty, the situation was finally clear. I was being ejected from my son's life. What surprised me most was my own reaction. Instead of anger or despair, I felt something close to relief. A strange, serene smile formed on my lips. You're right, Thomas, I said softly. This isn't working. I'll go. My calm acceptance seemed to confuse him. Perhaps he'd expected me to beg or argue. Instead, I turned and walked to my small room, where I began methodically packing my few remaining possessions into a suitcase. I heard Thomas and Amanda arguing in hushed tones, then footsteps as Amanda approached my door. Quentin, you don't have to leave tonight, she said, her voice gentler than it had been in weeks. Thomas is just upset. Give him time to cool down. No, Amanda, I replied without looking up from my packing. Thomas is right about one thing. This arrangement isn't working. It's better for everyone if I go now. But where will you go? She asked, genuine concern in her voice for the first time in months. Don't worry about me, I said, zipping my suitcase closed. I'll be fine. Once Amanda left, I made a phone call, one I'd been preparing for since overhearing Thomas and Amanda's late-night argument about gambling debts. The conversation was brief but reassuring. Everything was in place. When I emerged from my room with my suitcase, Thomas was waiting in the hallway, arms crossed defensively across his chest. You don't have to be dramatic about this, he said, attempting to sound reasonable. We can discuss alternative arrangements tomorrow. There's nothing to discuss, I replied calmly. You've made your feelings clear. As I headed for the front door, Lily appeared in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Grandpa? Where are you going? She asked, her voice small and confused. I knelt down to her level, my heart breaking at having to leave her. I need to go away for a little while, sweetheart, but I'll see you again soon. Promise? She asked, wrapping her small arms around my neck. I promise, I whispered, holding her tightly for a moment before standing up. Thomas watched this exchange with a mixture of impatience and discomfort. As I opened the front door, he spoke again. Dad, this is ridiculous. Where will you even go at this hour? I turned to look at my son one last time, the strange smile still on my face. Goodbye, Thomas. I hope you find what you're looking for. With that, I walked out into the night, closing the door on Thomas's confused expression. As I loaded my suitcase into a waiting taxi, I felt no anger, only a profound sadness for what had been lost, and a quiet determination about what needed to happen next. The taxi dropped me at the Westfield Grand Hotel, a luxury establishment in the heart of downtown. The doorman greeted me by name as I approached. Good evening, Mr. Adams. We've been expecting you. Inside, the manager personally escorted me to a corner suite on the 12th floor with a stunning view of the city lights. It was a far cry from the windowless room I'd just left behind. Is everything satisfactory, sir? The manager asked as he handed me the key card. Perfect, thank you, I replied. And the other arrangements? All taken care of, as per your lawyer's instructions. Mr. Goldstein will meet you in the morning at 9. After the manager left, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the city where I'd spent most of my life. From this height, the construction sites I'd once labored on were just tiny patches of light in the urban landscape. I thought about the homes I'd built, the structures that would stand long after I was gone. I'd always taken pride in building things that lasted. It was ironic that my relationship with my son had proven more fragile than any house I'd ever constructed. I unpacked my meager belongings and prepared for bed. Despite the emotional turmoil of the evening, I slept soundly for the first time in months. There's a certain peace that comes with finally facing the truth, no matter how painful. Morning arrived with soft sunlight streaming through the windows. After a leisurely breakfast delivered by room service, I met with Harold Goldstein, the attorney who had been handling my affairs since Julia's death 20 years earlier. "Everything is proceeding as planned, Quentin," Harold assured me, reviewing documents spread across the suite's elegant dining table. The paperwork was filed first thing this morning. "And Thomas has been notified?" I asked. "The official notices should be arriving at his home and office within the hour." Harold adjusted his glasses, his expression serious. "Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed with this? It's not too late to reconsider." "I'm certain," I replied without hesitation. "Thomas needs to understand there are consequences to his actions." What Thomas didn't know, what I had carefully concealed from him, was the true state of my finances. While he believed I had sold my modest home and contributed most of the proceeds to his household, the reality was quite different. Over my 40 years in construction, I had made prudent investments in real estate. Starting small with a fixer-upper, I renovated myself. I gradually built a portfolio of rental properties across the state. I lived modestly, putting most of the rental income back into acquiring more properties. By the time of my retirement, I owned 12 fully paid-off properties, generating substantial monthly income. I had also never fully signed over ownership of Thomas's house. When he was starting his career and wanted to buy a home, I had helped with the down payment and remained on the deed as co-owner, a fact Thomas had either forgotten or chosen to ignore. Harold was now processing paperwork to assert my ownership rights and freeze the assets Thomas had been using to fund his gambling habit. It wasn't revenge, it was intervention. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is allow their child to face the consequences of their actions. As Harold and I finished our meeting, my phone rang. It was Amanda, her voice tight with panic. "Quentin, what's happening?" "Men just delivered papers to the house, and Thomas Island. He's not taking it well." "I imagine he isn't," I replied calmly. "But perhaps now he'll be willing to have an honest conversation." "The bank just called," she continued, sounding close to tears. "They've frozen our accounts. Thomas says it's your doing. Is that true?" "The bank has frozen accounts associated with gambling activities," I explained. "And yes, I did provide them with the necessary information." "How could you do this?" Amanda's voice rose with distress. "We have children, bills to pay. Your household bills will be covered," I assured her. "I've arranged for direct payments of the mortgage, utilities, and the children's school expenses. What won't be covered are Thomas's gambling debts or any new bets he might place." There was a long silence before Amanda spoke again, her voice quieter now. "You knew. All this time you knew about his gambling." "I suspected," I admitted. "I confirmed it when I overheard you arguing that night. The $100,000 I contributed wasn't from selling my house. It was money I set aside to test Thomas. I wanted to see what he would do with it." "Test him?" Amanda repeated, disbelief in her voice. "I needed to know how deep the problem went," I explained. "When I discovered he was using that money to pay gambling debts, rather than putting it toward your children's education as promised, I knew he needed more help than I could provide by simply being present in your home." Another call beeped through on my phone. Thomas's business partner, Warren. I told Amanda I needed to take it and would call her back. "Mr. Adams," Warren said when I answered, his voice formal and strained. "I've just had a very disturbing conversation with Thomas. He claims you're attempting some kind of financial takeover?" "Not a takeover, Mr. Davis," I clarified. "Simply an intervention. I believe Thomas has been using company funds to cover personal gambling debts. As his business partner, you deserve to know." Warren's sharp intake of breath confirmed my suspicion that Thomas had kept his addiction hidden from his partner as well. I had concerns about some discrepancies in our accounts, Warren admitted after a moment. But Thomas always had explanations. Are you certain about this? I have documentation, I replied. My attorney can share it with you if you wish. That won't be necessary right now, Warren said, his voice heavy with disappointment. I need to reevaluate our partnership immediately. Thank you for your candor. As I ended the call, I felt no satisfaction, only sadness. My actions would cause Thomas immediate pain, but I hoped they would prevent greater suffering in the long run. Sometimes foundations need to be stripped down to solid ground before you can rebuild something lasting. Throughout the day, reports continued to come in through various channels. Thomas had received legal notice that the house was partially owned by me and that I was exercising my right to prevent its sale or use as collateral for loans. The bank had frozen accounts connected to gambling activities, including several credit cards Thomas had opened in both his and Amanda's names. Warren had initiated proceedings to audit their business finances and had temporarily suspended Thomas's access to company accounts. Amanda called again in the afternoon, sounding exhausted and frightened. Thomas is falling apart, she said. He's threatened to leave, to declare bankruptcy, to fight you in court. Now he's locked himself in the bedroom and won't come out. Where are the children? I asked, concerned for my grandchildren. I sent them to my mother's, Amanda replied. They don't need to see their father like this. That was wise, I agreed. Amanda, I know this seems cruel, but Thomas needs to hit bottom before he can start to recover. The gambling has controlled him for too long. I know, she admitted quietly. I've enabled it, pretended it wasn't happening, covered for him with the kids. I just never knew how to stop it. Sometimes we need outside help to break destructive patterns, I said gently. This intervention isn't just for Thomas, it's for all of you. By evening, Thomas had finally emerged from seclusion, determined to confront me directly. Amanda texted that he had discovered where I was staying and was on his way to the hotel. I asked her not to accompany him. This confrontation needed to happen between father and son alone. I ordered dinner from room service and waited, preparing myself for the storm that was about to break. The foundation had been stripped bare. Now we would see what remained to build upon. The knock on my hotel suite door came at precisely 7:30 that evening. Forceful, angry knocks that revealed Thomas's state of mind before I even saw his face. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and opened the door. Thomas stood in the hallway, disheveled and wild-eyed. His normally immaculate business attire was rumpled, his hair uncombed, his face haggard from what appeared to be a sleepless night. His expression cycled rapidly through shock, anger, and confusion as he took in the luxury suite behind me. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, pushing past me into the room. "You're living in a 5-star hotel while pretending to be a helpless old man who needed to mooch off his son." I closed the door quietly and turned to face him. "I never said I was helpless, Thomas. You assumed that." "You sold your house," he shouted, gesturing wildly. "You said you had nowhere else to go." "I never sold my house," I corrected calmly. "I rented it out, like the other 11 properties I own. The $100,000 I gave you was from my liquid savings, not from selling anything." Thomas stared at me, momentarily speechless. He sank onto the sofa, his legs seemingly unable to support him any longer. 11 properties? He finally managed. "You own 12 properties? How is that possible? You were a construction worker." "I was a construction worker who understood the value of real estate," I explained, taking a seat across from him. "I bought my first rental property when you were 5 years old. A foreclosure, I renovated myself on weekends. I reinvested the rental income, buying another property every few years. Living modestly allowed me to build wealth slowly but steadily." Thomas shook his head in disbelief. "Why didn't you ever tell me? I tried to teach you about investing, about building wealth gradually," I reminded him. "You weren't interested. You wanted quick success, the fastest path to what you considered a successful life. So this is all some kind of lesson?" Thomas's voice rose again. Destroying my life to teach me some twisted version of financial responsibility? I'm not destroying your life, Thomas. I'm saving it. I leaned forward, meeting his angry gaze directly. You have a gambling addiction that's spiraling out of control. You've betrayed your wife's trust, endangered your children's future, and jeopardized your business partner's livelihood. If that continued, you would lose everything anyway, but without the safety net I'm providing. Safety net? He scoffed. You call freezing my accounts and sicking lawyers on me a safety net? Yes, I said firmly. Because I've ensured your mortgage will be paid, your utilities will stay on, and your children's education won't be interrupted. What I've stopped is your ability to feed your addiction. Thomas stared at me, his expression a mixture of anger and dawning realization. Then he attempted another approach. Dad, I made some mistakes. I admit that, he said, his tone suddenly conciliatory. But I can fix this. I just need a loan to tide me over until some investments pay off. With your properties, you could easily help me. $200,000 would clear everything up, and I swear I'd pay you back. I shook my head sadly. There are no investments about to pay off, are there, Thomas? Just more bets you're hoping will finally break your losing streak. His facade cracked. You don't understand. I'm so close to turning it around. The system I've developed is the same delusion every gambling addict clings to. I interrupted gently. There is no system. The house always wins eventually. You've lost over $400,000 in the past 18 months. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Thomas's face went pale. How did you know that figure? I hired a forensic accountant after I overheard you and Amanda arguing about gambling debts, I explained. Every withdrawal, every credit card advance, every loan against your home equity, it's all documented. You had no right to spy on me, Thomas shouted, standing up again. I'm a grown man who was planning to take his father's retirement money to cover gambling debts, I reminded him. A grown man who kicked his father out of his house when that father accidentally mentioned financial problems in front of a business partner. Thomas flinched at the reminder of his cruel words. For a moment, I saw shame break through his anger. I didn't mean for things to go this far, he said, his voice quieter now. It started small, just poker games with clients. Then sports betting. It was always just to unwind, to network for business. But then I had a few big wins, and it felt like I'd found a way to solve all our financial problems at once. And then you started losing, I prompted. Thomas nodded, slumping back onto the sofa. At first, I was just trying to win back what I'd lost. Then I was trying to win enough to cover the new debts I'd taken on to pay the old debts. It's like quicksand. The more I struggled, the deeper I sank. Why didn't you come to me? I asked. The question that had been haunting me for months. I would have helped you. How could I? Thomas looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. You sacrificed everything to give me opportunities. You worked your fingers to the bone so I could go to college, have a better life. How could I tell you I'd thrown it all away on something as stupid as gambling? The raw pain in his voice struck me to the core. In trying to give my son everything, had I inadvertently made it impossible for him to admit failure? Had my sacrifice become a burden too heavy for him to bear? Thomas, I said gently, my sacrifices weren't meant to be a weight on your shoulders. They were given freely, out of love. But I failed you, he whispered, tears finally breaking through. I had every advantage you never had, and I still managed to ruin everything. The business is probably finished now that Warren knows. Amanda is talking about taking the kids and leaving. And I treated you, my own father, like garbage because I couldn't face what I'd become. In that moment, I saw my son clearly for the first time in years. Not the successful professional he pretended to be, nor the cruel stranger who had ejected me from his home, but a frightened man, drowning in consequences of his own making. You haven't ruined everything yet, I told him. But you're at a crossroads. You can continue denying the problem and lose everything for real, or you can accept help and begin the hard work of recovery. What kind of help? Thomas asked, a fragile hope in his voice. "Professional help," I said firmly. "A gambling addiction treatment program, financial counseling, family therapy for you and Amanda. It won't be easy, and I won't bail you out financially. That would only enable further destruction. How am I supposed to keep the house? Support my family?" The panic was rising in his voice again. "The house is partially mine, and I won't let it be foreclosed," I assured him. "But you'll need to downsize to something more affordable. As for supporting your family, you'll need to work, but in a position where you don't have access to company funds until you've established a solid recovery." "You make it sound so simple," Thomas said bitterly. "Not simple," I corrected. "Necessary. And I'll be there to support you. Not with money for gambling debts, but with the tough love you need right now." Thomas was quiet for a long time, the weight of his situation settling around him. When he finally spoke again, his voice was different, the defensive anger replaced by exhausted acceptance. "I don't deserve your help," he said. "Not after how I treated you." "This isn't about what you deserve," I replied. "It's about what you need, and what your family needs. The question is whether you're willing to do the hard work of rebuilding. Not just your finances, but your integrity and your relationships." Thomas looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time since entering the room. "I don't know if I can," he admitted, "but I want to try." It wasn't a declaration of immediate change. It wasn't a promise of easy resolution. But in that moment of raw honesty, I saw something I hadn't seen in my son for a very long time: courage to face the truth. And that, I knew, was the only foundation strong enough to build upon. "Then we'll start there," I said, reaching out to clasp his shoulder. "One day at a time. 6 months can change everything or nothing at all. It all depends on what you do with the time." For Thomas and his family, 6 months of hard work brought changes none of us could have imagined on that terrible night when he told me to get out of his house. I sit now on the porch of Thomas's new home, a modest 3-bedroom ranch house in a quiet neighborhood. It's early morning, my favorite time of day, and I'm watching cardinals flit between the bird feeders Lily and I set up last weekend. From inside, I can hear the sounds of the family preparing for their day, the clatter of breakfast dishes, Jackson practicing his trumpet, Amanda reminding everyone about afternoon schedules. Thomas's new home is 15 minutes from my apartment and about half the size of his previous house. After the intervention, he and Amanda made the difficult decision to sell the large house and use the proceeds to pay off gambling debts and start fresh with something within their actual means. It was a humbling move, but one that Thomas now recognizes as liberating. "I was drowning in that big house," he told me recently. "Always worried about keeping up appearances, terrified someone would discover I couldn't really afford it. This place, it's honest. I can breathe here." Thomas's recovery journey hasn't been easy. The first month was perhaps the hardest, as he faced the full consequences of his addiction. Warren dissolved their business partnership, though he was kind enough not to press charges for financial improprieties. Several credit card companies initiated collection proceedings. Thomas's gambling counselor insisted on complete financial transparency, which meant showing Amanda every debt, every secret account, every lie he'd told over the years. "I thought she would leave me," Thomas admitted during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "I wouldn't have blamed her if she had, but Amanda proved stronger than any of us knew. Once the secrets were exposed, she became Thomas's fiercest advocate, attending family sessions at the treatment center, managing their new household budget with meticulous care, and creating a home environment that supported Thomas's recovery. "I married him for better or worse," she told me one afternoon while we prepared dinner together. "The gambling was the worst. Now we're working toward the better." Thomas found a new job 3 months ago, not as a high-flying consultant, but as a programming instructor at the local community college. The steady hours and structured environment support his recovery, and he's discovering a genuine talent for teaching. "I'm making less than half what I used to," he said when he first got the job. "But I sleep at night now. As for me, I moved into a comfortable apartment about 2 miles from Thomas's new home. I never moved back in with them, even during the transition period. Some boundaries, once established, need to remain in place for relationships to heal properly. Instead, we built a new relationship pattern. Sunday dinners at their house, Wednesday morning coffees with just Thomas and me, occasional weekends where Jackson and Lily stay with me. I'm part of their lives now, but in a healthier way that respects everyone's independence. The grandchildren have adapted to the changes with the resilience of youth. Initially confused by the move to a smaller house and their father's money problems, they've since settled into new routines. Jackson joined the school band instead of the private tennis lessons he can no longer take. Lily and I continue our bird-watching hobby, expanding to include nature photography with an inexpensive digital camera I gave her for her birthday. Last weekend, Thomas joined us on our bird-watching expedition for the first time, a small step that represented a giant leap in our healing relationship. "I never understood why you liked this so much," he said as we sat quietly by the lake, watching herons wade through the shallows. "Now I get it. The peace, the patience, the way it forces you to slow down and just be present. Those are lessons Thomas is learning in many areas of his life now. His gambling recovery program emphasizes one day at a time, mindfulness, and accepting what cannot be changed. After 6 months of dedicated work, he recently received his 6-month sobriety chip, a milestone he keeps in his pocket, as a constant reminder of both how far he's come and how vigilant he must remain. "The urges still come," he confessed to me last week, "especially when I'm stressed or when I see ads for the casinos. My counselor says they might always be there in some form. The difference is I now have tools to recognize and manage them instead of being controlled by them." Our relationship has transformed as well. The resentment Thomas carried for years, the burden of feeling he could never measure up to my sacrifices, has gradually been replaced by a more honest, adult connection. We talk now, really talk, in a way we never did before. "I spent so much time trying to impress you," Thomas told me during a recent heart-to-heart conversation. "I thought if I had the big house, the successful business, all the trappings of success, you'd finally feel your sacrifices were worth it. I never realized you just wanted me to be happy." "And are you?" I asked him. "Happier now, I mean?" He thought about it carefully before answering. "Not every day. Recovery is hard work. But yes, overall, I'm happier living truthfully than I ever was living a lie." That, perhaps, is the most profound lesson in all of this. Truth, no matter how painful, is ultimately less destructive than the most comfortable lie. My son had to lose nearly everything: his business, his luxury home, his self-image as a successful provider, to find something more valuable: authenticity. And I had to let him fall. That was my hardest lesson as a father. Sometimes the most loving action isn't to cushion the fall, but to ensure the landing doesn't kill them, then help them stand up again afterward. This morning, as I sit on Thomas's porch watching the sunrise, he joins me with 2 cups of coffee. We sit in comfortable silence for a while, no words needed between us. "Thank you," he says finally, "for not giving up on me when I gave up on you." "That's not how love works," I tell him simply. "True love doesn't have an ejection seat." The sun breaks fully over the horizon, painting the modest neighborhood in golden light. It's not the life either of us would have chosen 6 months ago, but it's real, solid, and built on a foundation that can withstand storms. Sometimes, you have to lose everything, external, to find what truly matters. For Thomas, it took losing his false success to find genuine fulfillment. For me, it took being rejected by my son to ultimately build a more honest relationship with him. Life rarely gives us what we want. More often, it gives us what we need, if we have the courage to accept it. That's the lesson I hope to leave with Thomas, with my grandchildren, and with you who have listened to my story. Have you ever had to let someone you love face difficult consequences to help them grow? Or have you been the one who needed that tough love to find your way back? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who might need to hear that. Sometimes, losing everything is just the beginning of finding what truly matters. Thank you for listening to an old man's story of love, loss, and the courage to rebuild. Until next time, remember that the strongest foundations are often built after everything else has fallen away.